Hello. Today I'm going to show you how to create a virtual assistant that you can talk to on your phone or on a Google Home device. So we're going to create a Google Assistant action, and this action will communicate with a Node.js server that I have code for that I'll share out on public GitHub. And this Node.js server is going to actually talk to Watson. So Watson Assistant will take the input text or the questions and will provide a reply that will come back to your Google Assistant. So it's very easy to use Google Assistant to create these actions, and with very little code I'll show you how to interpret those requests on a Node.js server and get the communication going back and forth between you and Watson. Let's take a peek at the finished product before we look at the steps to build it. This is the simulator, so here I am in the developer console for Actions on Google. I've already created my project. I gave it an invocation name of Watson. Notice it says down here, I can start it by saying talk to Watson. It also says I can test it on any device, so I don't need to use the simulator. You can test this action, even though it's only my test app. I can test it on my phone already. But the simulator gives you more information, like you can look at the request and the response, and you can get debug and error information. Now the actions, I'm going to show you how we upload those using the command line interface, but I've already uploaded those. I have enough here to connect Google Assistant to my Node.js server, which will talk to Watson and reply. So here to run the simulator, I'm going to say talk to Watson. Talk to Watson. Now this will connect to my backend.
Here's the test version of Watson.
I can reserve a rental car for you. What day do you need a car?
So that part came from Watson, and this rental car conversation is going to want to collect information about when I need a car and what kind of car I want. That part's fairly simple, but it also understands that as I answer those questions, I might do it a little out of order. I might change my mind, and I might digress. I'd like an economy car.
What day do you need a car?
Thursday around noon.
What color economy car do you want?
I changed my mind. I'd like a really fast car.
What color sports car do you want?
So I already showed you how we can get into the conversation by saying talk to Watson. I can cancel the conversation, and Watson actually had a chance to say goodbye. In filling the slots, I was able to say I want an economy car and then go back and change my mind and say a fast car. And it associated that with a sports car. When I said Thursday at noon, I was fulfilling both the date and the time slots, and it understood noon as 12 o'clock. I'll show you that in a minute. The other thing I want to do is show you how I can digress. Talk to Watson.
All right, getting the test version of Watson.
I can reserve a rental car for you. What day do you need a car?
Tuesday.
What time on Tuesday do you want the car to be ready?
Around noon.
What type of car would you like?
Are you human? A typical question people
I'm not
ask
a
a
human,
bot
but
is
I can
whether
give
it's a
you
bot
one
or a
second.
human.
What
So
type of car
that's a
would you like?
digression that we're going to handle. And so I had a simple reply, and notice it comes right back to asking me what type of car. It's trying to fulfill those slots so it can reserve a car for me. Do you know any jokes? Other digressions are things like, do you know any
I know
jokes?
one joke. Why did the chicken rent a car? To cross the road. Ha ha ha. What type of car would you like?
A common digression would be, refer me to your manager, or maybe giving positive or negative feedback. That was brilliant.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. What type of car would you like?
Notice how it will digress, but it keeps coming back to trying to find out what kind of car I want so it can make this reservation. Something really fast and very red.
Okay. Please confirm. You want a red sports car on the 31st of July 2018 at 12 p.m. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. Unfortunately, I don't really have any cars. This is a demo chat.
Okay, well, thank you, Watson. So, you notice we covered a lot there. Getting in and out of the conversation is something that I have some code for to help that handoff between Google and Watson. The slots is a Watson feature where we could fill them in one at a time, or you could say all at once, I want a red sports car tomorrow at 12, and it will capture all those slots in one sentence. But if I do it one at a time, it will keep prompting me as we go. And if I ask for a midsize and then later say I want a sports car or a fast car, it will correct that. Now, the other thing that I thought was really interesting here is using digression. Notice in the middle of all this, I can ask it if it's a robot. I can ask it to tell a joke. I could give feedback or ask for a manager. This is not wired up to be forwarded to a manager, but there's at least a reply to address those things, have a fairly robust conversation, and still go about the business of collecting this information and trying to get to the end. Now, in the end, I don't have any actual cars here, but I think this was a successful conversation. So the first step is to deploy the server. I'm just going to use the Deploy to IBM Cloud button. You press the button and then you hit Deploy to deliver the pipeline. You can see it gives you a unique ID using a timestamp. That's going to be what our app URL will contain. We'll see that later. Fill in the regions and click deploy. So we created the Watson Assistant service, but we also linked it to the app. So this is our app. You can see the date timestamp. And I'm going to click on that. You see it's connected to my assistant service, but it also has a visit app URL. I'll just go in that to see the route. This is just a message that tells you it's running. That's a GET. We're going to use a post when we call it from Google Assistant. But this is the URL that I want to hit. So you can see it's just Watson Google Assistant with the timestamp and the domain. But I'll capture that, and we're going to plug that in when we configure our action. The next thing I need is a project. So I'm here on the Actions on Google Developer Console. I just click on Add Import Project and give it a name and say Create Project. Any authentication here would be your Google login, which I think everyone has one. So we're going to create this project. It will ask what kind of action I want. It's for like category listings. In our case, we can just skip that for now. So I'll hit skip. I'll make the fonts a little bit bigger here. So we've created our demo project. The first thing I like to do is get the project ID. So the easiest way to do that is go to Overview and click on this gear and see Project Settings. This is where you can capture the project ID. So I named it Demo, but this generated ID is the one that I'm going to use to register actions from the command line in a bit. Also, this is where you'd come back if you want to delete the project later. So now I have my project ID. The next thing I'm going to do is come over here to Setup and set an invocation name. You can skip this and just call it your test app by default. You can say, talk to my test app. But I like to put a name in here. I like to say, talk to Watson, even though it's a trademark. But what you want to do is pick an invocation name and set it so that you can practice with it and make sure it's a name that is easy enough to pronounce so Google will recognize it and your users can say it easily. Be sure to click Save. So now I have my name saved, even though I'm being warned about the brand name. Next, we're not going to come here and build actions. I'm going to go to the command line and do that. Okay, so now we've gone to the developer console, we've set up our project, and we have our invocation ID. Let's go ahead and do the command line part. It's really documented in the README, so you can just follow it step by step, so I won't run it. It's a little easier to point to here. But basically you clone the repo. So Watson Google Assistant, you run that on the command line. To get the CLI, you can follow this link, and you'll see you'll get G actions for different platforms. Once you get it, you have to make it executable. So what we've done here, my browser will put it in the downloads directory. So you make it executable, and then you copy it into your cloned repo from downloads into Watson Google Assistant / actions. You could put it in your path, but the example below will use it right out of actions. Now we have to go into actions and edit this actions.json. That's because you have your own URL that we want to, where you're running, we need to send the post request to your URL. So you're just going to put that in there. I can show you what that looks like. This is the file that you get. You just need to change this with the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 to be whatever your URL is. So you're running there on IBM Cloud. Otherwise, this is all set up to go. Any explicit talk to your invocation name will go to that URL. Also, you notice here we've registered some implicit query patterns. So if you're on your phone, you can say, hey Google, rent a car. Hey Google, get me some wheels. This is how you would do implicit patterns. Once you've made that edit, you just run on the command line right here, the .g actions. So that's the file we copied in. You say update. The package is that action.json file that we edited. And then the project is that project we saved earlier from the Google console. So you run update, and it might prompt you. It will give you a URL and ask you to paste that in your browser and get an auth ID. That's how it's going to get your Google credentials to do this. But just follow those instructions. And next, run the same command, but this time use test, again with your project ID. And it'll tell you it's ready to go, and you can start testing it in the simulator or on the phone. If you have another minute to look at the code, I can show you that start and cancel, and also how I store the context. There's really not a lot in the code. It's right here in index.js. There's some setup because we're actually installing that assistant workspace and connecting. But for the Google part, once that's up and running, basically we have this assistant message. This is for Watson Assistant. We take the incoming request and we want to look at the conversation type and the intent. So this is where I look at the intent to see if it's a cancel, because if it's a cancel, you have to return expect user response false. I also wanted to force it into my goodbye intent just to say goodbye. You'll get an error if you return something greater than 60 characters, so I'm catching that specifically here. I'm also catching conversations that are new so that I can clear the context and start over. So I'm forcing those into the start over intent in Watson. The other special case here is if it's not one of those kind of resets, I'm pulling the context out of conversation token. So we're just pushing the context back and forth between Google and Watson. So I can pull that out, and decode it right here out of the conversation token. So now I have a context to give to Watson, so it will know where I left off in the conversation. So now I can talk to Watson with this message call. I take the input text and my saved context, and I send it, and I get back a response and a context from Watson. So I resolve that. The next thing we're going to do is format it. So first, the saved context, we're going to turn it into a web token so we can store it in conversation token again, so it goes back and forth. I'm going to take all the output text and combine it into one line so it can be spoken. We're going to build up the JSON as needed. This is the simple format for Google Assistant. Notice it'll want to know if it expects a user response, and it also has a place here for us to stash our token. So a little more JSON, and then I added this little check so I don't get an error if we say goodbye and a longer statement that's longer than 60. But that's it for that code. Now you notice all we have here is a post. Well, this is my status message on the get. We saw that earlier. But when you post, it just sends the JSON to Watson Assistant, and then it formats the response and sends it back. And that's it. We're up and running. We have a Node.js server that can communicate in between Google Assistant and Watson Assistant. Hey Google, rent a car.
All right, for that, you might like Watson. Want to give it a try?
Yes.
Sure, here's the test version of Watson.
I can reserve a rental car for you. What day do you need a car?
So that's it. It's working on my phone, even though it's still just a test app. And you've got the code, the repo, all the steps you need. Hope you give it a try. Good luck.